Hello, I'm Rebecca Hoffman, coach for Magenta's storytelling program, The Edge. The stories you're about to hear are segments of a serial story I wrote for Dragonfly, a storytelling program featured on KXRW and X-Ray FM. We will hear some of our Magenta actors telling about the goings-on in a fictional Northwest town that may seem familiar to us all. Here's the scoop, coming to you straight from the town that has no concept of time. It's not even welcome here. Welcome to Cape Couve.
I'm Carol Radkins, and this is Cape Couve, Episode 1. The sun was just coming up, scattering its beams in a restless pattern across the cove. The reason for the movement of the water was Gregorio Sanchez's oyster boat, the steamer, coming back from his pre-dawn tour of the oyster beds he was managing. The steamer carries its smelly catch of oysters in 2 large baskets, and Gregorio hummed to them, hoping to keep them calm. Calm oysters make for better sandwiches, his wife Rosalie would tell him. Rosalie ran their little beach restaurant at the cove, also called Rosalie's. And she was already there at the dock, waiting to inspect his haul for the day.
He could hear her making the noise under her breath. She was rarely pleased with his work, always too little, too late, too underperforming for her tastes. Yet he loved her. He loved the way she moved around the tiny kitchen in their bodega, behind which was Rosalie's. She swayed as if listening to some secret melody, using her arms and legs to keep a rhythm going while she cooked and cleaned and prepped for the day.
Rosalie loved Gregorio too, though he was not her first choice for a husband. That man, Zeke, had died in an airplane crash. A small plane he had piloted right into a mountain, seeming to have become disoriented in the deepening dusk. That man had been a good friend of Gregorio's. Gregorio and Rosalie had met at Zeke's funeral, and Gregorio was completely swept away by Rosalie's white linen dress as she stood near the urn holding the pilot's ashes before they were taken out to sea on the steamer. Rosalie was one of the funeral party that joined him on the steamer that day, and he wanted nothing more than to comfort her forever.
These were the kinds of stories that Artemis was wanting to hear. Artemis Farrow had been a reporter at a small-town newspaper in Michigan when, like so many small-town newspapers, it had been bought up by a large publisher, and suddenly her services were no longer needed. She took this as a sign that it was time to move on. She had worked in the schools, teaching, writing, and journalism part-time, and when her program was cut, she had landed a spot at the local paper, the River Post Eagle. There, she had a column on local life in their small river town that was slowly dying after the Ford factory closed.
She packed up Bounder, her barky little terrier, pointed her Subaru west, and didn't stop until she saw the ocean. Here in the little cove town known as Cape Couve, a little seaside town, a sleeper community somewhere on the coast, north of Portland, west of Seattle. Never mind. You'll just have to look it up. She arrived in the pre-dawn darkness, the sea air still chilly in the waning moonlight.
Artemis took a room at the Dewdrop Inn, a resident hotel rented by the week or month, about 2 blocks from the waterfront, where she was allowed to keep Bounder in her room.
Nice pooch,
said Mrs. Johnson with her deep smoker's voice. She stood there in a robe and shower cap, pink curlers barely staying in place around her thinning gray hair. She came from a time when people still wore curlers overnight, but hers were clearly askew, her fingers long since losing their dexterity at rolling her hair.
Hope he doesn't bark too much.
Artemis assured her that he was manageable, lying as she took the keys to room 209.
I expect the rent a week in advance,
added Mrs. Johnson. She stubbed out the cigarette she had just finished and lit another one.
Yeah, I sure hope he's a quiet one.
she said as she closed the door to her office behind her.
Artemis unlocked the room, which clearly was hastily put together recently, dusted, and new sheets put on the bed, because it still had the musty smell of a room that had not been aired out in some time, mingled with the smell of the newly purchased sheets. She had called ahead a few days prior to book the room for a month while she considered what to do next.
She had read about Cape Couve, a little town on the Pacific Northwest Cove, famously hard to find at the end of a narrow, winding road with several unmarked turns off of Highway 101, because the locals were always trying to take down the direction signs. She was determined to find it.
She unpacked her duffel bag as the sun was starting to peek through the pines, putting her clothes in the dresser and her laptop on the desk. That and the bed were the only furniture in the room. She would call for a chair to be added later in the day. But now she decided to see just what Cape Couve was made of. She put Bounder on his leash and headed down the back stairs, which she had seen when she drove in.
From the top of the landing, Artemis turned to see the water, the salt air stinging a bit. That is when she saw the scene of Gregorio tying up his oyster boat, transferring the baskets to the waiting pickup, the couple having a brief embrace before climbing into the cab of the truck and tootling off.
Then the place was quiet again, just the slightest morning breeze as the sun continued to appear. She and Bounder walked down the steps and the 2 blocks to the main part of town, its tap room, church, and fishing dock, the main structures there. The small main street had a bakery, a glass trinkets shop suitable for tourists, a few empty storefronts, what looked like a dark theater with old posters peeling on the walls, and the ubiquitous cannabis shop. Still, there was no one about after the Sanchez's had taken their catch away in their pickup.
The door opened and someone turned the close sign around to open. The beckoning aroma of coffee floated down the street. The door opened again and an arm reached out and beckoned her. Artemis surveyed the scene. There was a sign for parking, for picking up after your pet, another for the cannabis shop, and an odd one featuring a performer, it would seem, apparently named Foxy Lula, welcoming you to Cape Couve. Come inside. Artemis walked toward the beckoning shop.
Bounder,
She said,
I think I'm gonna like it here.
"That's a scoop from Cape Couve, where the time isn't even a concept.